Welcome to Diverse Joy, a podcast that infuses science, practical skills, and most of all, joy into conversations about diversity. My co-host is the festive Dr. William Cox, aka Chris Kringle, aka St. Nicholas, aka Bobo Natale, aka Santa Claus.
And my co-host is the merry, jolly, and Mrs. Claus bounding Dr. Amber Nelson. And with this podcast, we go all around the world in one night.
In one night.
Did you know that's actually true? When you like our podcast host has a way where you can look at a map of where people are downloading it, and we have people all over the world.
That's amazing.
Mostly English-speaking world, but also South America.
Great.
But yeah, Australia, Europe, all over.
That's amazing. Look at us. Look at us reaching a wide audience.
So Amber,
Yes.
this December holiday season,
Yes.
what is bringing you joy?
Oh man. Well, December, like October, November, December is like my time when it comes to holidays. But one of my best things at December is Disney at Christmas. And so, that's part of our bingo is me mentioning Disney, but I have not really talked about it from my joy perspective. And Disney at holiday time, it is another level of just festive and happy and joyful time. And I got to go this last Christmas, with my family, with my mom, and we just had the best time and dressing up and going around and just seeing all of the characters. It's just, I don't know how to explain it other than it's another level of just joy and festivity. I actually, while being there, I got to be an honorary citizen. I got a couple of times was granted an honorary citizen badge by just bringing joy, I think an extra level of joy to the park. So
I also wonder if those badges are because your outfits are so good.
Yes.
That they're worried people will think you work there. So if
That's
you
all
wear
that
that
could
badge,
be.
it declares that, you're really awesome, but
Yes,
also not
but
an employee.
I'm not an employee. That is very possible. That is very possible because I do get asked a lot about things about the park, and I'm like, I don't actually work here, but I can direct you to where the bathroom is.
That's always my favorite thing too. When I'm dressed up and someone asks me for directions, I always say, like, I don't work here, because you can get in trouble if you pretend.
Yes.
But I was like, I don't work here, but I do know where that is.
Yes, I'm like, I can help you a little bit, but I don't actually work here.
So it's not my official joy, but just glomming onto yours a little bit. I also, for the first time ever, was at Disney during their holiday celebrations this past year. So I was there. So at Disney's Hollywood Studios, which is where the Star Wars stuff is at Disney World, they had this after hour party called Jollywood Nights. And it was really great because they only let a certain number of people in.
Right.
So there were no lines, and they were very enthusiastic people. So a lot of people were dressed up, and had all the characters and holiday stuff like you were just describing. So I have to agree, having experienced it once, that was a lot of fun.
It's another level of joy for sure. Now, about you, what is your joy for December?
My joy for this episode, this December, a couple of friends, I actually mentioned them in the Halloween episode this year too. Chad and Jeremy throw this amazing, they call it their ginger party. And going back over a decade now, they have this party and people decorate gingerbread houses, and they use the kind of craft ones so you can keep them. So they're not actually made of gingerbread, but it's kind of wood and cardboard that looks like gingerbread. And so they actually have this whole village going back to 10 years of this.
Wow.
And so we do that every year. They have so many houses now that they're starting to encourage people to do different kinds of things, like just gingerbread people and so on. This last year, I made a koi pond, like a gingerbread koi pond.
That's so cute.
So I got little colored fish gummies and used some translucent acrylic resin to make it a little pond with water, surrounded by candy canes holding the pond together.
Love that.
Reminiscent of my koi koi pond.
That's so cute. And you can have like a whole little village of your own house, right? You need to get a little T-Rex and a koi pond. And that's great.
Yeah. So it's always lots of fun. And, we have very creative, sassy friend groups. So lots of fun little things.
That's so cool. Jealous. Yeah. I might need to like steal that idea and start doing it myself.
Yeah, do it. And so, some year we'll do recording where you can maybe actually attend.
Yeah, I can be there. That would be amazing.
Awesome. So today we have a topic that we've briefly mentioned once or twice before, and it's something that whenever we're doing our brainstorming and planning, for our listeners, we put a lot of work into planning out each season, kind of like a course, a college course, but with more joy than going to college. But we put a lot of work into thinking about everything. And this is a topic that has come up several times, and we were figuring out where to fit it in. And we're talking, our jumping off point at least is cancel culture.
Cancel culture, which I think is a really interesting thing because there's so many facets to it. One being the need for accountability, right? And I think that that's where the intent comes in when we hear or see canceling or cancel culture. And on one hand, I'm in total support of creating accountability.
So if someone does or says something that causes harm, they should be held accountable for it.
They should be held accountable for it. Absolutely. And recognizing that what we've moved to in our culture is that we very quickly cancel people, and that canceling really moves us into this idea of like public shaming, and moving people to, there's no room for making mistakes. There's no room for true accountability and ability to not necessarily atone, but like correct the mistake. And I think that that's really where I sit, is in that the difficult space of saying like, can we acknowledge that something or somebody has caused harm and there needs to be retribution, there needs to be accountability to it, for it, while also allowing somebody to take responsibility and to move forward.
And to do better.
Because
the whole idea of kind of cancel culture is like someone makes some kind of whatever kind of mistake, and then they're not allowed to be in the public eye anymore, or be in their career anymore. And I mean, there are some cases where it's like serious abuse kinds of allegations where that kind of removal from kind of public adoration or whatever is warranted. But not a lot of the cases that we're seeing.
Absolutely. And the difference between harm and abuse, right? Like when there's abuse, it's a different level of accountability that's required when maybe there's harm or there's a miss or a misunderstanding or something where there is room for somebody to say like, oops, I made a mistake. How can I move forward? How can I take accountability? How can I take responsibility? How can my community or the community at large holds me accountable to maintaining change in this area, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, so there's this really good book. Actually, I'll just show it. We Will Not Cancel Us. And it's by Adrienne Marie Brown. And I think it's just really good. It's just a really small booklet. But a lot of what she talks about is this idea of transformative justice rather than even restorative justice. And we hear a lot about restorative justice. And the difference really is with restorative justice, the purpose is to restore things back to the way it was. And when we're talking about cancel culture, the reason that restorative justice isn't really where we want to go is because it's restoring it back to like, okay, you've apologized and we're going back to where we were. Transformative justice is saying like, how can we move forward and grow from this? Not just going back to like, we're copacetic, right? Yeah. But like, I have taken responsibility for this. I have room for growth. I can move forward. And actually talking about like, how do we do this in a way that's not just punitive and shaming, right? And actually moving towards growth and healing and not shame and punishment.
Yeah, and this reminds me of kind of the distinction between guilt and shame. So guilt is I feel guilty about a specific act, something I did.
Right.
Shame is kind of an all-encompassing. I am altogether an awful person. Right. Everything about me is rotten. And this kind of public shaming is the latter. It's you did this thing, so everything you've ever touched is tarnished. Right. Everything you've ever done is awful, and you're an awful person.
Right.
When in many cases, not all, but of the kind of cancel culture, that it's taking it too far.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing is that like and again, there's so many things. There's this other perspective, which I also can appreciate and agree with, is that in order for movements to take hold or for people to feel motivated to change, that the canceling or the hitting people's pocketbook, to use an old term. Sorry, it reminds me. I was in a class once, and I used the term pocketbook, and I had a guest that kept referring to their purse as a pocketbook, and my student texted me like, "What is a pocketbook?" I was like, "Oh, your pocketbook's like your purse or your wallet."
You're canceled for being too old.
Too old. But so I also recognize that like in order for some folks to be motivated to change and to actually say, yes, I'm going to do something different. Yes, I'm going to grow. Yes, I'm going to change, that there has to be something more than just being called out, right? Like I have to like have that extra motivation to say like, I'm going to do something different. And oftentimes that's hitting somebody where they get their money, right?
Yeah. I have an personal example, I guess, or it's a public example. So J.K. Rowling, however you say it. So the writer of Harry Potter. So, I mean, she came out with some pretty awful things about trans people, saying some stuff. And when many of her fans were kind of calling her out about it or trying to reason with her about it, she nothing even close to trying to apologize or anything. She doubled and then tripled down and has become an anti-trans warrior in just a way that is just truly awful. Right. And for me and Roman and I know, we used to really love Harry Potter, and we have now complicated feelings about it. Exactly. But one thing that we are as a household are decided on is no money. Is like, because one of the reasons she's so rich is she kept all the licensing rights, every product, every toy, video game, anything she gets a piece of. And so no money from ours goes to Harry Potter. Doesn't mean we turn it off if it's on TV or like sometimes we'll watch those things because we already own them. Right. Also, but even like reading the books or things, you can buy them from a used bookstore. That won't go money to her. That's not going to go towards her. Yeah. But it is complicated. Like, later this season, we're going to have Sandy back on. And as I know, Sandy also really loved Harry Potter. But as a trans person, I wonder what their feelings are about it now. Absolutely. We can maybe revisit this when we have Sandy here. Yeah. But like, so the hitting in the pocketbook, or for kids in the wallet. The wallet. I don't think that. Well, look at how much we spend on Disney. Right. Like if Harry Potter were still something where we would have felt comfortable with our money going to it, how much money would we have spent on Harry Potter in these last 2 years? Who knows? Could have been a lot. I've never tried adding up how much we spend on Star Wars and other Disney properties. Right. I don't want to know.
You're like, well, just not going to think about that right now.
But yeah. So I mean, she's so rich, I don't think we're making an impact. But for me and where my dollars go, that matters.
Well, it reminds me of what we talked about in a previous episode around like, it doesn't matter whether there's a trans person in the room or a Black person in the room. Like, what is our integrity around like my values, and where am I putting my support support. And there's that balance of, okay, we can call somebody out or call somebody in. That difference between call out versus calling in.
Say, do we want to redefine that for people? I know we've talked about it before, but just in case.
Yeah, I think calling out is much more this cancel culture.
You're racist. You're awful.
Yeah, you're awful. There's no. It's kind of a cutoff, right? Like, you're wrong. Fix it. I'm telling you exactly what to do, and there's no real room for the transformation. And then calling in is less like this public shaming, but saying like, hey, let's talk about this.
We can work on.
Here's my perspective. Here's where I think where there's a miss here. How can we move forward? How can you move forward? Right.
I have a story that someone told me from one of my trainings that is a really good example that's kind of calling in versus calling out. So this is a white woman, but she has an adopted Black child. And like most children, you know, her son was going through a very active phase and was kind of running all around being a bit crazy. And she was talking with a Black adult friend and said something along the lines of, "Oh, he's my crazy little monkey." And the friend, so in case anyone doesn't quite get why that might be a problem, you know, there's a lot of bad racist associations where people have associated Black folks with animals, especially monkeys. And so that's sensitive and has all these racist connotations.
Right.
And her Black friend, you know, called her in rather than calling her out. Right. She's like, I know you love your child. Right. There's nothing racist intended about this, but you need to understand that if you cannot calling any Black person a type of animal, especially a monkey, really is a serious issue. You don't want to do that. Really, I know you love your son. Right. I know this has nothing to do with race for you, but you got to understand how other people hear it.
Right.
And it was very much a calling in. Yeah. Because if it was calling out like, "Oh, you're so racist towards your son," or something like that, that would be a calling out, which would have just had her recoil and not want to engage, presumably. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and honestly, there's even that with the word crazy, right? Like, we're really moving towards like, oh, what's the pejorative understanding around crazy, and shifting. Like, I recognize that I use it all the time, but I'm a clinical psychologist. And I'm like, wait a minute. I had a student called me in and was like, "Doc, like, maybe not crazy." And I'm like, you know, you're absolutely correct. You're
cuckoo bananas
or wild. Like, that's what I use wild now as my replacement for that. But yeah, how do we call folks in and not just say like, "Oh, she's terrible because she used this word," or there's these things and like,
and for the most part, like, unless we're talking about like the N-word or like a straight up slur,
right?
There's no like using one word doesn't make someone a terrible person. Right. We just see what those words mean and what their connections are differently.
Right. And again, there's this opportunity for and language is shifting all of the time,
and we're figuring out better ways to do things.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, again, you talked about cultural inertia. We've talked about that, and that there are things that we have learned implicitly or unintentionally that are just part of our zeitgeist that we start to internalize and use regularly without questioning it. And now, you know, I think that we're in a time in our world, and particularly in our culture, where we're starting to question things and question the use of certain words and certain things. And it's okay to be called in when we use a term that we've never questioned before, or how we've used that. Like, you know, another colloquialism is, you know, used to say like, "Oh, let's have a powwow." Okay, well, maybe let's not use that term anymore because
it's associated with Native American spiritual rituals, which we also talked about with the cultural appropriation stuff at Halloween. That, you know, it's something that's actually very spiritual and sacred to those Native American religions. Absolutely. And so making it the little fun, cute thing that we say is,
Right. Yeah. And again,
Eric Roman has one of those when people say like such and such is my spirit animal. Right. That's one that some people have started pointing out. Or maybe I've been pointing out for a while, but
Yeah. And I've heard several folks talk about what the meaning and how the term spirit animal has shifted, and there's lots of different kind of perspectives on that now. But I think overall, when we're talking about cancel culture, again, is what is that line? And it does look different when we're talking about public figures, right? And again, where there might be a different level of accountability that we're calling them into, and that there has to be space for us to allow them to correct when we've called them in. The whole purpose of us trying to hit them in the pocketbook, trying to, I feel like such an old lady. I don't know why I keep going to book. How often do I say this term? I don't know where it's coming from, but how often, like, we might need to do that. This is there for a reason. And also, once it's there, once they have heard the message and have corrected, can we as a culture, as a space, have as a culture, as a community, have space for them to make the correction and move forward without us continuing to say, like, nope, you made a mistake. You've said the wrong thing. You've done the wrong thing. And then never allow them to change.
I have another good example of this, which we'll get to once we get back from break. So one example of this, like on the other side, not the kind of J.K. Rowling doubling down,
right?
But something where I think it was a genuine misunderstanding and just people using words in different ways happened to Whoopi Goldberg a few years ago. So I forget all the context, but basically somehow people were talking about the Holocaust, and she said, and race and racism, and she said the Holocaust wasn't about race. Now, for people who study the Holocaust and think about it a lot, it was Jewish people were essentially considered a race,
right?
And they were trying to extinguish that race. That was a genocide,
right,
of a race. And this goes to the idea of race being a social construct. What we define as a race changes based on cultural context and the conversations people are having. I think from Whoopi's perspective, she was thinking of race in a very American way about skin color.
Right.
And although there was some skin color stuff with the Holocaust too, I think her as a Jewish Black woman was thinking it was about religion and not thinking of Jewish as being a race.
Right.
But a lot of people were trying to cancel her, like, how dare you say it wasn't. She wasn't saying like Jewish people weren't being exterminated for being Jewish. Just her idea of what race means is different.
What race means,
and she's not a sociologist who's studying all this stuff. She's a comedian, and and when I mentioned I was going to tell the story, Eric Roman said there might be other weird things she said, so I'm not. And this is part of the point. It's not that any person is wholly good, wholly bad, wholly right or wrong in what they say, but using that as just a specific example, it was an honest misunderstanding, and trying to cancel her for that doesn't really make sense. If we have even just a little humility, which is getting towards what our skill will be later, like realize from her perspective, race is about skin color, and she's thinking of the Holocaust as being about religion, and it makes sense. It's not a totally nutty,
it's not
hateful,
totally unfounded.
She's not Holocaust denying.
Right. And exactly. And I think that's the nuance I think that we have to hold folks with, and being able to say like, oh, okay, can we hold some understanding and context? Like, I'm really big on like contextual awareness, right? And being able to say,
that should be another Diverse Joy bingo. The word context.
Context, I know, right? I say that a lot too. We do. But can we hold some of that nuance and hearing like, let's call somebody in, and then they say like, oh, I see what you're saying. This is what I meant. Can we say like, okay, and can you recognize how the way that you said that this was harmful? Okay, yeah, and then being able to, again, allow somebody to move forward. Similarly, I think you talked about, maybe prior to recording, we talked about Lizzo and one of her lyrics in one of her songs. I can't remember which song it was, but she used the term spaz, which is a term that is related to cerebral palsy. And
spastic palsy.
Yeah.
And so it's the abbreviation of that. And so someone who has that, it's kind of a shaky behavior.
Yeah. It's a spastic kind of movement, right? And so it used to be a term that people used all the time, like using the R word or using the term gay as a pejorative, right? Like these were terms that used to be used without even thinking about it. Yeah. And now, like, we recognize
when that thing happened with Lizzo, I didn't understand. I was like, wait, what's wrong with the word?
What's wrong with that? Yeah.
Like, I had no idea that it was related to like a disorder people have.
Right, exactly. And so when she heard or when she was called out or called into like, hey, why did you use this term as a derogatory term? She was able to say like, oh my gosh, like I made a mistake and went through and she corrected it. She re-recorded her song.
Yeah, she re-recorded
changed the word. She corrected it immediately. And I think
apologized.
Yes.
Her apology statement. If you ever need to make an apology statement for something, go look at that as a perfect, what some people call a quad box apology. She recognized the harm.
Yep.
She acknowledged the context.
Yep.
She promised to do better.
Yep. And I think that's the ultimate goal, right? Like, again, nobody is going to be perfect ever, right?
Perfect is not a thing that exists.
Perfect does not exist. And holding or expecting people to be perfect and never make mistakes is unrealistic and harmful as well. And that I think that the whole goal of calling out, calling in, canceling, hitting people in the pocketbook is to have that kind of response. And if we can hold people accountable enough for their actions, but then we can get that level of response, then can we also have enough humility and enough grace to allow them to move forward without still saying, nope, you screwed up. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's great.
All right. So, how about some story time?
Story time. Yeah.
All right. So we both have some stories today.
Yep.
But we're gonna start off with you, and it's related a little bit.
To holidays.
Definitely to holidays. I was saying a little bit to cancel culture.
Yeah,
maybe,
a little bit to cancel culture.
Take it away.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about holiday season and everything. And one of the things that I shared last season is, during the holiday season, I have a massive holiday sweater collection.
Yes. She has a room that
basically
a third of the room is sweater storage.
It's just sweater storage. I have a lot of sweaters. I think I'm at about 70 holiday sweaters now, 65, somewhere in there.
And does that mean you do 70 days of sweaters because you still wear them all?
I try, but I usually start right after Thanksgiving.
But you do have Halloween sweaters.
I do. I usually start after Thanksgiving, and I used to have a few at Halloween time that I start, and then I go through New Year's. So however many days that is. Anyway, so when I was in internship, I wore my sweaters, and, I recognized that I was in a hospital setting, and there was a very specific idea of what quote unquote professionalism is and how we should dress. And I think that every part of what I wore was within standards of what quote unquote professionalism was. And I wore my holiday sweaters because it was holiday time. And also, again, as a reminder, I work with kids, right? So I worked in a children's hospital. Yeah. And I just had a supervisor that really did not appreciate that I wore my holiday sweaters, and got not officially reprimanded, but there were comments every single day about my sweaters.
Again.
Yeah, like, oh, you're wearing another sweater. Like, are you sure? And then I actually got pulled in and they were like, it's a disclosure that you are celebrating holidays. And I was like,
But as someone who's seen the sweaters, and those of you who follow us at Diverse Joy on Instagram, we posted a countdown of them last year. But you have Hanukkah sweaters and you
sweater.
You're not Jewish. You have Kwanzaa,
Jewish.
I assume.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's
and
not...
also, I and I identify as Christian. I have Santa sweaters. I'm literally dressed as Mrs. Claus. I have the full range and some that are just like wintry.
But it's also it's being festive. So I'm atheist and I'm dressed as a Santa bounds kind of right now. It doesn't mean I'm Christian that I'm dressed like this. And I mean, to some people that offends them that Christmas isn't about religion as much for everyone. But yeah.
Yeah. So it was an interesting experience where somebody was, and it's challenging when you're a trainee and you have a supervisor that's kind of telling you what you can and cannot wear or making comments around how to dress. And it was an interesting place for me to sit in trying to figure out is this, am I being corrected? Do I have to am I being told I have to change? Is this against a policy? Am I doing anything? And then I was like, well, there are lots of things that people wear that are disclosures, even if I am disclosing that I'm celebrating this holiday, right? If I went on Ash Sunday or Ash Wednesday and I left with the Ash cross on my forehead, that's also a disclosure of something that I'm celebrating and I practice.
And that's more religious than Santa.
Right. Or if I was wearing a hijab or those kinds of things, those are all disclosures about something that I believe in or that I celebrate. And I think that it's okay. I think it's okay, even as a psychologist, even as somebody who, we talk a lot about what we can and cannot disclose about ourselves. So there are lots of things that we can disclose. Anyway, it was an interesting experience being told you shouldn't wear your festive sweater.
And this isn't something that you've said, but it makes me wonder, would it have been the same reaction if you were white? Because that's one of those things where it's ambiguous. And I think we're talking about ambiguity in a later episode, but often members of stigmatized groups get more penalized for those sorts of things than the members of more dominant groups.
Yeah. One, and being held to those standards of what is professionalism and what you have to look like, policing our hair, policing our dress, policing all of those things. And so
harken back if anyone wants to revisit episode 2 of season 1, which was entitled "What is Professional Anyway?" I think that was one of our best episodes where we talk about this whole idea of dress and questioning the idea of what is and isn't professional. I have kind of a similar story, if you don't mind me glomming on a little bit, also related to holiday kind of attire. So I'm generally kind of festive, but Christmas was a bit fraught for me for a long time because of the religious associations and bumps with my kind of family. But many years back, I was had a meeting with my lab group, and it was right at the end, right at the beginning of holiday break. So this is when I was still in the academic system, and so there's winter break, and it was just a casual meeting with two of my colleagues, my supervisor and colleague. I knew they were both super into Christmas. As far as, trees and carols and all that kind of stuff. And I had this onesie that was so much of cats with Santa hats. And I was like, oh, they'll really like this. I'll be a little festive. Kind of for them. That was definitely the thought process. It was before I embraced some of my exuberant dressing inspired in part by you. And I was at this meeting, and there's never been much of a dress code. The supervisor in question, who's the subject of the story, often showed up in workout clothes after after having gone for a run and
Right.
stuff. It's not like we were dressed in shirts and ties and things.
Right.
But for whatever reason, she was just very offended that I was in this onesie and just kind of snapped at me and said I was so unprofessional and so disrespectful and something.
Yeah.
And it like wasn't revealing or anything.
Right.
It wasn't like I mean, it is it's a onesie, so it's kind of pajama-ish, but like it's a lot more than some of our students would sometimes wear, and a lot more than like the workout clothes that I'm thinking about that the supervisor would wear all the time.
Yeah.
And just she kind of crapped all over me. And it was just like, and I mean, I think I don't know. I think it was more about her than it was really about me, 100%. But it was just that kind of stuff just makes you feel crummy.
Yeah. 100%.
And sorry, not to make your story about me,
no,
but
I think that's a really good point. Like you said, I think that it reveals more about them than it does about you. And there's always room. And I tell my students this all the time that like, when we get feedback or we get those kinds of comments or things, for us to be able to sit and like, okay, is there something for me is there something in this that I do need to take? Or is this really about that person, right? Again, my sweaters, your onesie, like that was more about them. Like, I'm okay with this disclosure. I'm okay with what I'm wearing because I know that it's quote unquote professional. Like everything else about this is professional. Like this is a space where I don't have to wear professional clothing. I'm being festive. Like this is about your discomfort, right? Not mine.
Yeah, and one could have asked. I just didn't even know what to do in the moment. But like, so is there a dress code all of a sudden for these meetings? Because I have questions about some things you've worn, but I would never comment about that because well, also the power difference.
There's also the power difference for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And this is something I'm pretty sure we've talked about previously, but if we haven't, when someone violates a norm, sometimes the norms come from these kinds of biases, cultural inertia. That's our new bingo square for this season. I keep talking about it. Sorry if listeners are bored of that term. But like very often norms, just the way things have always been, become this norm. When people violate the norm, it gives you kind of a frustrated feeling.
Right.
Even if you don't necessarily believe in the norm, it's what your brain is seeing as, oh, this is some kind of violation. It gives you these kind of aggravated, frustrated feelings towards the person breaking the norm. And that can lead to these kinds of lashing out.
Well, not even, not to go back to our topic, but I think that that's some of that too, right? Especially in where we're at right now in the culture, is that if somebody violates maybe a new cultural norm and these things that's making people uncomfortable, like you're not as PC as you need to be. You're not as aware as you need to be. And that discomfort is what leads to people canceling or correcting or judging how we dress or talk or act or whatever that is too.
Yeah. And since we are back on the cancel culture, which is fine because I think both our stories kind of relate to it. Sometimes people frame it as a conservative versus liberal kind of issue, like, oh, liberals are the cancel culture. But really, it happens in both directions.
Absolutely.
So that, which actually leads into my positive story. So again, we always have a negative and a more positive story. So my positive story is about my dad. And back, I think when I was in middle school-ish, there was someone who got upset that like a cashier or something was saying happy holidays rather than Merry Christmas. And this is, y'all know how old I am from our last episode. It was back in the 90s. So it was before cancel culture as we know it now was a thing. But this was kind of the early seeds of it or the earlier version of it where, oh, you said happy holidays. It's supposed to be Merry Christmas, kind of canceling someone for saying happy holidays. And my dad, who himself is a conservative Christian military guy, was like, no, I prefer happy holidays because that's more inclusive. Like, I don't think he used the word inclusive back then either. But he was like, some people are Jewish and they celebrate Hanukkah. Some people are, celebrate other things. And so happy holidays includes everyone rather than kind of forcing one thing. So that's not your positive story. Like, my dad, love you, Dad, thinking through that carefully and going against, like, the Christmas cancel culture is definitely a huge thing where people are like the war on Christmas and attacking Starbucks for having a red cup rather than it being specifically a Christmas cup, which all these other trappings. And so it's not a conservative issue or a liberal issue. It's both.
It's both.
People on both of those kind of sides engage in this kind of cancel culture. And Misguided.
100%. And I love that your dad, as somebody who maybe would lean more on the like, oh, there's an attack on Christmas, like was able to say like, there's more than just Christmas happening at this time. And there are people that are celebrating all kinds of things. And there is this, again, this broader concept of like, how do we have enough space to not police people, right? And say like, because this is, my perspective or the thing that I do or the thing that I celebrate, that everybody must also acknowledge and recognize it as such or celebrate the same thing that I do.
And also I just want to draw attention to or emphasize, this is something he said in passing at a checkout to me when I was a tween or whatever. And I still remember it.
And you still remember
it.
Exactly.
And like, it's, sometimes things are big conversations and sometimes it's one comment like, I do it this way for this reason. And it sticks with people.
100%.
So especially with like this kind of terminology stuff we're talking about, like don't use the word crazy or whatever, someone it was the equivalent of saying, oh, I don't like to use the word crazy because I feel like it stigmatizes people with mental health issues. So I say cuckoo bananas. Like something as simple as that can stick with someone and change their behavior and change how they think things for years to come. So it can be a simple thing that doesn't have to be the shaming, cancel culture calling out like we're talking about. So.
100%. And we know like the research around shame, right? Like in public shaming is just like, it's not helpful. It's not helpful. If I boil it down to one thing, it's unhelpful and it doesn't actually move anybody towards change or healing or growth. So
if anything, it just leads them to shut down and withdraw and not even be able to deal with it, not even be able to handle it. And
often sometimes even double down, like because it feels like I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't, right? Like I'm trying really hard on this thing and I made one misstep and I still got canceled or punished instead of being recognized. Like I'm really trying here. Can you acknowledge that I'm making an attempt at being good at this, even if I wasn't perfect at it. Mm-hmm.
And so we're starting to get into the question, answering the question 100%. Actually. So let's just make it official so that Roman can put our little thing on the TV screen. Question time.
Yes.
Hey. So our question for today is and we've actually gotten this submitted by several different people and worded differently, but our kind of summary of it is, how do we have constructive conversations about very difficult or polarizing topics? And we've already started to answer this and I'll just reiterate it. So the example I just shared about my dad, that story and the idea of like not using the word crazy or working things out, making it about, here's what I do for myself.
Right.
So I'm trying to stop using the word crazy because I don't want to stigmatize people with mental health issues. So it's not saying anything about what you should or shouldn't be doing. I'm sharing my perspective, my decision for myself. In the very first episode of this season, I did that with the you guys example where like for myself, I've decided to many years ago decided to kind of stop using that because I wanted to be gender inclusive. And it's like, this is my decision. This is how I see it. And that's my language thing.
Right. Absolutely. And I think
one way to have a constructive conversation.
Absolutely. One, it's the using I statements, right? Like, and the non-blaming, non-shaming perspective of saying like, this is for me, or this is how I hear it. This is how I experience this thing when this is said or when I hear this. And I think a big part of it too is there's I think that we have to sit and be ready, recognize our own body. Last season, we talked about listening to our body. We talked about wellness and kind of health. We have to recognize like what's coming up for me when I'm having a difficult conversation. What are going to be quote unquote triggers? What are the things that I know I have a lot of feelings around? And can I regulate myself so that I'm not reacting in the moment based on my emotional experience, but rather like listening to what's actually being said, what's being said, and also listening for intent, right? Again, intent does not always match impact. It doesn't always match impact. And we do have to take in consideration impact. But I also think, I should say, And I also think that we need to listen for intent. And if we can sit with listening for intent, we can have a better conversation rather than reacting to the things that I don't like about what's being said. And we can actually have a more productive and constructive conversation if I can regulate my emotions, I can know what's happening in my body, kind of calm myself down and respond rather than react. And I think that that's a big piece of what happens oftentimes is I hear a trigger word or I hear something, somebody said something wrong or somebody did something, and I'm reacting to that because it causes an emotional experience rather than me slowing down and saying like, okay, what's actually happening here? What's trying to be said? And can I respond to that? Because that's actually going to move us forward. And again, like I said, what often happens is people react and then cut off. And then there's no room for either side, either person in this interaction to actually move forward or have some common understanding about this interaction.
Yeah, a couple of this is more in the line of tips rather than maybe a coherent argument, but I think each of these tips helps. So one other thing, and it's kind of something we've already touched on, so we don't have to go too deep in it, is really thinking through what words mean and kind of the literal meaning of something versus the kind of deeper baggage and context for yourself and for others. And I think I'm just rephrasing some of what you said, but like the Whoopi Goldberg example I shared earlier is an example of this. You know, what race meant for Whoopi versus people who are thinking about the Holocaust in a historical sense. Like understanding that when she said the word race, she was thinking about skin color and a U.S. context, and being as literal as possible, not try to use language and ways of talking about things that don't depend on understanding a context as much, because if someone else doesn't have the same context, it's harder. So thinking through that is a good tip.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that you're absolutely right. And, one of the other things though, that I'll hear when we're talking about having constructive conversations or difficult conversations is often particularly marginalized and oppressed folks feeling like they have to do the work in holding space for somebody else's misunderstanding. And that is true. That happens a lot. And I think that if you're being harmed in that conversation and somebody is unable to like recognize or slow down enough to realize that they're harming you, you don't have to stay in that conversation either.
Yes,
you
absolutely.
also can step back and say like, this isn't for me, or this isn't the right time. I think that thinking about the timing of the conversations is also okay. So if you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the emotional bandwidth, you don't have the physical bandwidth, you don't have the time to sit and have this conversation, you don't have to subject yourself to like training somebody or teaching somebody or doing that in that moment. And so being able to recognize your own safety in that moment as well is also really important and important to acknowledge.
And I think listening to your body is a part of that too.
Absolutely.
If you're feeling yourself hot under the collar and
right.
all of that.
This isn't my time to have this conversation.
Yeah.
And James Baldwin has this quote, and it is, we can disagree and still love each other, unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. And so when you start to see that place, right, and you start to have that conversation and this person is unable to acknowledge and recognize how these terms, whatever is happening is oppressive and is a denial of my like humanity and right to exist, then again, it is not your job to like have to make everybody understand and see that and push into those places. Like take care of yourself, and it's okay to step back and say like, this isn't my battle right now, right?
Yeah, that's something I struggled with a lot to learn. And one way that I think of it, and I've advised other people on it, your perspectives are valuable. they're a treasure. Your insights into things, your unique perspective, all of those are valuable things, and you don't have to give them away.
Right. Yeah.
To someone who's not listening. Like, withdrawing from the situation, from the meeting, from the whatever, it's their loss.
Right.
And if they're not wanting to calm themselves down and come to you in a more respectful way, they don't need to get the benefit of your insight into whatever the project is, thinking of workplace kinds of things. Yep. If they're not listening to you and you're saying something about a project is going to go awry, and they're overlooking what you like, well, they don't get the benefit of your contribution.
Right.
And I think sometimes people have a hard time letting go of that because they're like, these people aren't listening to me, or they aren't. It's like, no, you can pull away. It's their loss. Don't spend your valuable resources, time, energy on people who aren't worth it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And your own humanity, right? Like because it is a sacrifice of self to continue to push in systems or in spaces or places or with people that are unwilling to see and value what you have to offer, what you're saying.
And if they're pushing you to a place where you're feeling that anger and things, justified though your emotions are, it's them that's doing that.
Right.
And don't let them push you to be or do or say or feel something that isn't right for you.
Right.
And that diminishes you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's another way of checking in with yourself, right? Like one of my checks is like, are these interactions pulling me outside of my character? Right? When I find myself being argumentative, I'm not an argumentative person. Like I have opinions. I'm opinionated in that regard, but I'm not argumentative. And if I feel like I'm being pulled out of my character, if I feel like I'm being pulled out of this, like those are cues for my own self to recognize like, oh, this isn't a healthy interaction for me. How do I pull back and maintain my integrity and maintain my own sense of self without overexpending in a particular area or particular situation? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So what is our habit breaking skill this episode?
So our skill is something we've actually kind of already been talking about. Is to listen with humility.
Yeah.
It's pretty much what it sounds like. There are so many things that we just don't understand about other people's perspectives. It could be, I usually use the Lizzo example we talked about earlier, where, she used a word and then people were saying things to her and she could have been defensive about it. She could have been like, oh, shut up, you're being stupid, like about just a silly word. But she was willing to have the humility to be like, I don't know everything. I didn't understand the origins and connections with that word. And she listened with humility and then made a change. And
non-defensiveness, right? Like being able to not only hear with humility and saying like, I have space to learn and grow, but also like in a non-defensive way, being able to accept and say like, oh, right? Like, and rather than, I think getting aggravated about like, well, I wasn't intending to do that, right? Like that wasn't my intention. Well, but it still landed this way. Can you hear it from that kind
of getting aggravated, frustrated, angry? An audience member gave me this little mnemonic device: get curious, not furious.
Ooh, I like that.
So like if you feel someone saying something to you, it's making you angry. Wait. Get curious. Why are they bringing this up? Right. Because just like you feel valid in what you said and you understand your context, they're not coming from nowhere. They have some reason for their reaction.
Absolutely.
That you can come to with humility and curiosity, and be better off than if you just kind of reject or don't even consider their perspective. And it's not always that you're going to agree with them, but having the humility to try to hear them out, hear why the thing they're talking about is important to them, why they had the reaction they had is better.
And I even think, the bidirectional part of this, is also not only being curious about why they're bringing it up, but why you're having the reaction that you're having, right? Like, where's the anger coming from? What's happening inside of me? Like, both being curious about why somebody's bringing it up, but why am I having the response that I'm having too?
And that harkens back to what we said earlier about kind of norm violation being frustrating. Also, just, anything where it's pushing you outside of a comfort zone. Well, that's where change happens, and change has some of those kind of negative, frustrated feelings associated with it.
Yeah.
Just like, working out your body, you have to no pain, no gain kind of an idea. Changing stuff in your mind involves a little bit of discomfort and figuring things out. Closely related, the other side of the coin for this skill is to not be a gatekeeper. Don't be a gatekeeper. And for anyone who doesn't know that term, gatekeeping, I think it mostly came out of the internet. That's where I know it from. But it's where certain words or ways of doing things become this kind of cancel culture thing where it's like, well, for instance, if you don't have your pronouns in parentheses after your name on your name tag, you're not a good person. Right. You're not trans friendly or whatever, or things like that. There's one that I ran into that was kind of context specific, but at one of my bias habit breaking trainings, there was someone who was I perceive it as offended. I guess I don't want to put labels on them that maybe they didn't feel, but they seemed very offended that I didn't start the session by talking to everyone about how this room was going to be a safe space for people to have discussions. And I think I do a good job of showing, not telling. Like I make it a safe space or a brave space for people to do this kind of learning. That's really a foundation of the whole training. But I didn't say those words when I started. And this person was kind of offended. That's kind of a gatekeeping thing, that if you don't start a conversation with this kind of disclaimer, then you're not doing something right. And it's kind of like, well, I mean, I see the benefit of that. I'm not against talking about that. It just wasn't how I did it. I did by showing rather than saying. So people sometimes get these rules in their heads that become gatekeeping. Like, if you don't do this, not good.
You shouldn't have access to X, Y, or Z, or shouldn't have the authority to speak into
You should lose your status as an expert or a good person or what have you. Our producer has something to say.
The pronouns example goes back to Amber's example from last season where she was asking people for their pronouns. And then one of the students was like, hey, you don't deserve my pronouns yet.
Exactly. No, thank you for that. You're absolutely right. Like, there's, again, the both and of that, of like, me telling you have to tell me your pronouns is also like not helpful either.
And there was, going with the pronouns thing a little more, there was this it was an internet screenshot meme that I saw, but there's this guy, everything about his gender presentation was very male, and his name on the social media platform was Mr. something. And there was someone commenting on it, why don't you have your pronouns in your description? He's like, well, I mean, it says Mr. And also like, why is it any of your business? He was more on the side of like, he was more of a conservative type person who maybe was against the pronoun thing, but also he actually did a good job of kind of listening with humility, just being like, well, why do you think I have to do that? And it was a gatekeeper, like, oh, if you don't have that listed, then you're not a good person. I'm calling you out for it. And it's like, well, no, like, don't be gatekeeper. Like, there's no one thing that people can do or not do that's going to be a hard and fast rule for everything. Again, pretty much except for using slurs.
Let's not use slurs. Or call somebody outside of their name or things that they want to be addressed as, right? Like, again, using pronouns or like identity markers. If somebody identifies as trans or asks for these pronouns to be used, calling them outside of their chosen name or their pronouns is a slur, right? Like that is like recognizing those things, recognizing that humanity. And one other thing I wanted to say, it kind of going back to the listening with humility, and that change also requires some level of discomfort, is recognizing and cancel culture. All of it really ties together. Is that we have to recognize that like when we the level of which discomfort, what level of discomfort change can happen at, right? Yeah. When somebody is flooded and like you've like it's been attacking or anything like that, their brain is shut off. Like their executive functioning is completely offline and their ability to kind of like listen with humility or be able to receive messages is not going to be in a place where they can do any change. And so part of our, if the goal of calling somebody in or making a comment or saying something to somebody is for change to happen, then we also have a responsibility in how we're saying and how we're delivering that message in a way that it can actually be received. Because if their executive functioning is completely offline, they're not forming memories, they're not hearing correctly, it's going to be much more likely that it's going to be received with defense than it is going to be received with openness and humility. So I think it's on both ends. One, I want to sit in a place of humility in receiving that. So I have to regulate myself and my emotions, but I also want to be responsible in how I'm giving feedback and how I'm providing that information so that I'm not dysregulating somebody else to where they can't hear what I'm saying.
Yeah. So listen with humility and don't be a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. So wrapping us up this December episode.
Yes.
We have a joyful recommendation. So this time of year, I know we both really enjoy Christmas movies.
Holiday movies, yes.
Well, yes, all holiday movies. But there's definitely a Christmas movie kind of industry out there.
100%.
Hallmark and others. And last year during this season, my friend Jack, who kind of runs our movie night group, curates the movies we watch, picked a great one that I want to recommend to all of you. It's called A Christmas Movie Christmas. And so the premise of this is there's two sisters, and just because we're talking about diversity related stuff, they're Asian American, and so get a little bit of representation there. Two sisters, one of them is very cynical about the holidays, and the other one is super into Christmas, super into Christmas movies, especially. And some kind of weird Christmas magic kind of thing happens, and they wake up in this little Christmassy town, and they're basically inside of a Christmas movie. And even if you just watch the trailer, it is super so charming and adorable and cute and quirky. Like you see, they like wake up wearing like little Christmas pajamas, just like fake movie magic. Their makeup's all done and their hair's amazing, and they look at each other and they're like, "Did you do your hair and makeup before you went to bed?
Did you go to bed with all that on?"
And because it makes fun of, pokes fun at all the different Christmas movie tropes, like people being perfectly coiffed when they come out of sleep. And they have a little kind of rom-com theme. They meet some guys in this town and go on a little rompy adventure. They as with pretty much every Christmas movie, they have to save Christmas for this small town.
I mean, absolutely.
And so like if you like Christmas movies, you'll enjoy this. And even if you think they're kind of cheesy and don't really like them, you might like this one because it is poking fun at all those tropes. One of the things Eric Roman pointed out the whole time we were watching this movie is how fake the snow looks. So the snow is clearly like stuffing that they have stuck on the trees as they're filming this in summer.
That's so funny.
and we think that it was intentional that it looks especially fake.
Hilarious.
But it has all the tropes, making Christmas cookies and one of them tripping and falling and the sexy man catches her.
Yes. Needing to save a Christmas festival. And yes, absolutely. That's so great.
So super adorable, adorable.
I have not seen it yet, so I'm definitely going to have to watch that one because I like like to collect all the Christmas movies.
There are too many. It's not possible.
It's true. It's true. I recognize, but I do enjoy them.
But yeah, a Christmas movie Christmas.
Love it.
Check it out.
Love it.
So everyone, that's been our show. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Solstice, Kwanzaa,
yes.
and any others. So I'm Dr. William Cox.
And I'm Dr. Amber Nelson.
Diverse Joy is produced by Eric Roman Binding with music by Jay Arner. It is accessible as a video podcast on YouTube or an audio-only podcast wherever you get podcasts, or at diversejoy.com. You can also follow us at diversejoy on most social media platforms. If you enjoy the show, help us reach more people by leaving 5-star reviews or recommending it personally. Word of mouth is one of the best, most successful ways to help promote a podcast. So if you're visiting family for the holidays and you feel awkward and don't know what to talk about with someone, or you're at a party and aren't sure what to talk about, mention the cool podcast you listen to. Be like, oh, there's this podcast about Diverse Joy. Like, check it out. That'll help us out a lot. Diverse Joy is the official podcast of Inequity Agents of Change, a nonprofit devoted to evidence-based approaches to reduce bias, create inclusion, and promote equity. All that good Jedi work. Learn more at biashabit.com. Thank you for joining us. Now, go find your joy.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, this chilly winter weather.
Bless you.
Thank you.